Okay, so we've covered the Hebrew word for soul, which is nephesh, and the Greek word is psyche. And we already discussed that according to Scripture, according to, we go to Ecclesiastes chapter 9, it says, "For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know nothing, know not anything. Neither have they any more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten." And then in the verse 10, "Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave, whither thou goest." So as we discussed, everyone goes to the grave. There's no life. There's no living forever in the grave. You're just dead. You're just sleeping until the time of the resurrection. That's something that the Hebrew scriptures, the Hebrew Israelites, they believed in the resurrection. Abraham believed in the resurrection. Isaac believed in the resurrection. Jacob, the prophets, Elisha, they believed, they even did resurrections in the Hebrew scriptures. So they didn't believe in this going to heaven. That was not part of the Hebrew scriptures. That did not come until later during the time of Yeshua when he rose again. So we've covered this information. The word hell comes from this Hebrew word Sheol, which just means the grave. So again, in the late 2nd century, early 3rd century, Christendom and their teachers in the Roman Empire started twisting the scriptures along with the philosophers, and they started to create their own fake Christianity, which was not in alignment with the Most High. And so that's why some people are afraid to use the New Testament, because they feel that it's been tainted, it's been tampered with. But what I'm trying to bring out in this video here is that there's nothing wrong with the New Testament if we know how to point out the errors of what Christendom has done. So this is one of the errors that they've tried to sneak in, is this teaching of the immortal soul and the teaching of hellfire. But now let's talk about another one. Let's talk about the cross. Let's talk about that, because that is not part of the Hebrew scriptures either. So the Hebrew word for an ancient type of execution hanging on a stake or a pole, let's see what Strong's Expository Dictionary says about that. So we go over to Strong's Expository. We look for the word tree. So we have various scriptures here, and here's the corresponding notations that we find the Hebrew word, the Hebrew equivalent to the English word tree. But notice if we go down to Deuteronomy, I'm going to share with you a scripture from Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 23. Okay, and notice over here we are looking up the Hebrew word, which is columned under 6086. Okay, 6086 for the scripture in Deuteronomy 21:23, and that is under the column of tree in the expository. So let's go over and read that. Let's see what we got. So we go over to 6086. There we go. And we have the Hebrew word est, and that's the word that means tree. And it also means the gallows. It means a plank, timber, tree, wood. Okay, so that is the Hebrew word for our English word tree. So now let's go to the Hebrew scriptures and let's compare it to the New Testament. See, is it consistent? So let's take example, Deuteronomy 21:23. Here we're talking in the Hebrew scriptures, talking about a criminal or someone who has been executed for not obeying the Most High's laws and commandments. It says here, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree. And we just read that in the expository. It comes from the Hebrew word est. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but you could also supplant that word for stake or pole or timber or the gallows. So his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day. And we know that back in the Hebrew Israelites' day, their days started from sunset to sunset. So they could not have him still hanging on that tree or on that stake before daylight time. Because it said, for he that is hanged is accursed of God. Okay. That thy land be not defiled, which the Lord thy God giveth for an inheritance. But here's the key point. For he that is hanged is accursed of God. All right, well, let's look at the equivalent in the Greek scriptures. So here we go to, or in the New Testament. I like to call it the Greek scriptures, but a lot of people refer to it as the New Testament. So Galatians 3:13. And again, we're talking about, is it okay to use the New Testament in our Bible studies? And when we're trying to learn about the truth from the Hebrew scripture. And yes, we can use it if we know what we're looking for. But we have to weed out. Remember that illustration or parable that Yeshua gave about the wheat and the weeds until the time of the harvest. And then it will be visible to discern what is the truth and what is the false. These false teachings that were brought in by the Christian churches during the time of the Roman Empire and Constantine and the Council of Nicaea and so on and so forth. So here's the equivalent in the New Testament, Galatians 3:13. And this is what they're quoting from that scripture that we just read in Deuteronomy 21:23. And here it says, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, and then here's the scripture from Deuteronomy that they are quoting, cursed is everyone who is hung on a pole. Well, remember Deuteronomy said hung on a tree. So we can see tree and pole being the same thing. Didn't say anything about a cross, did it? No. Because, in fact, let's go to the W.E. Vine's expository and let's see what the Greek word is, the equivalent Greek word for the Hebrew word estes. All right, so let's take a look at that. Okay, so here we're looking at an expository dictionary of New Testament words by W.E. Vine. I've had this book for quite a while. And so let's go to page 256. And we will look under cross or crucify. The Greek word is stauros. Notice what it says, brothers and sisters. It says stauros denotes primarily an upright pale or stake, upright, not crossbeam. On such malefactors were nailed for execution. Both the noun and the verb stauro, to fasten to a stake or pole, or pale it says, are originally to be distinguished from the ecclesiastical form of a two-beamed cross. Did you get that, friends? Stauros or stauro, to be fastened to a stake or pale, are originally is to be distinguished from the ecclesiastical form of the two-beamed cross. So in other words, the two-beamed cross was not the original meaning of the Hebrew word est, where we're looking up tree, which in Greek is the equivalent is stauros. But let's read on some more here. It says the shape of the latter had its origin in ancient Chaldea, Babylon. There it is right there. Had its origin in ancient Chaldea and was used as the symbol of the god Tammuz, being in the shape